All right, we're back. It is COMP1004. That's Rapid Application Development here at Georgian, and it's the fall 2016 semester, week 9, part 1 of our broadcasts. I want to talk about assignment number 4. So assignment 3, do this Friday at midnight. Assignment 4, you're going to do a computer ordering application. Now, I know these are little, I got to do ordering, I got to go calculations, I got to do, small little things. It's for a reason, because unfortunately we build apps for enterprise. That's what we built. We built a lot of little calculation apps, a little things that have basic controls that you get data, whether it's from a data source like a database or a flat file like a Excel file or Access database or something like that. You can do all that kind of thing with when you define a data source, which we talked about last week. So what is this thing that I wanted to get you guys to build? I want to start a little backwards. So I want to talk about what the actual thing is. This is a more complicated assignment, so I'm just telling you this in advance. Please don't start late. Splash screen. You've done that before. Yes? Sorry? What? On Blackboard? Oh, that's weird. Okay, I will update. Maybe it's the wrong one. Let's try it again. Yeah, it's totally wrong. That's the wrong one. Thank you. So, courses, it's always wonderful when we have this kind of issue, right? There it is. This is lesson 9. Yes. Okay, that's weird. I don't know how that happened. That was the old one. So we'll just update it now. I'll go here and we'll go into assignment number 4, which is this one. And we'll edit it and we'll get rid of that one. Now there is so there's 2 files. One, I'm giving you like a bit of data. So I've got this $computer SQL file that you're going to use where you can build out your products table. So that one should be okay. And we'll remove that one and let's just save that. And I'll come back to it. And I will edit that. And let's add another one. This should be the new one. Yeah. But should, would, could. Let's check it in a second. Okay, can you check it, please, and see if it's the new one? It should say 2016 now. Yay. Okay. Thank you for that. Let's go back to this. So if I go back to the bottom, so there's a splash screen. You have a bit of a start form that comes up. And you so again, a multi-form application, nothing new. You guys have seen all this before, right? You click the Start New Order, or you have an option to open a saved order. Now, this is something we haven't covered in terms of functionality, which we will cover next week. We're going to be covering file handling next week with exception handling a little bit too, right? How to do exception handling. We've done a little bit of that with try-catch, but we're going to do more of that next week. So if you click on this button, Start a New Order, it's going to take you to this form. What is this form? It's a data grid view, right? And we kind of covered a little bit of this last week, where the data grid view shows you a list of computer parts, or computers, actually. Now, these computers are old, right? Because the example, the assignment came from 2013. So, but don't worry about the data. It's the example, the exercise. Now, if you really want to be a stickler and you love computers, go ahead and make your own list. I don't care. You have the products table. You can certainly do something very similar here, but it has to be with this level of detail. Okay, so for example, the model, memory, LCD, CPU brand have these same headings, but if you want to mess with this, you want to add different models or whatever, you can certainly do that. Okay, so that's one thing. But so this thing is just lists a bunch of computers. Now, when you select one of the rows, I'll make this a little larger so you can see this. So let's say I selected this row number 7. Once I click onto it, the whole row gets selected. That's the effect that I want you to make work. How do you do that? Where the whole row gets selected. And at the same time, it calls a method, which we're going to talk about, that shows the selection here and records your choice somehow, whether it's through a class, create an object, something like that, right? So, example, when I say an object, I mean an object of type product, or the product class, right? And then you would have, let's say, the cost, the manufacturer, the model. All this information would be properties of the object. And when you click next, it's going to take that object and pass it to the next form. This is the good thing to do, right? So the selection form is one. When you get here, it takes the information in detail. This is almost like a detail screen of the stuff that you're ordering with all the details, right? And if you click select another product, it takes you back to this screen, right? And allows you to select something else. What it actually does is this form spawns this form, right? So as soon as you go back, that form has been destroyed, and now you have a chance to select a new form. We've done this before many times. This is just another example, yet an opportunity for you to practice going back and forth, because it's the biggest problems we have when we make applications and be able to pass data from one form to the other. It's always the problem, right? So when you guys get good at this, and again, if you go and do something in kind of in the real world, then it'll be good for you to understand how to do all that. Okay, so I select something, and I can go here. The other option is if I click the File menu over here, I can save my option. I can save what I've selected. Let's say I'm not ready to order it yet, but I want to kind of have a saved cart, if you will. I can save my selection, right? So that's what this File menu allows you to do. And if I'm not happy with this selection, but I remember that I have something else, I can also use the File menu to load something that I've saved before. And well, you're going to load and save something onto a flat text file. All right, so that's what it's going to be. You're just going to load strings and populate the object. And when you save strings, you're going to just push everything to the file. So that's really very simple. So the file handling we're going to do is really just reading and writing to a text file for the most part. Okay, so if you're happy with this, you're going to click next. It's going to take you to the final screen, and this is the order form. We've seen this kind of thing over and over again, right? Where it takes the information again. Now here I made it so it kind of showed my image. This is a little tricky because you have to have all the images for your for this stuff. I'm going to make this optional. I mean, like if you want to show specifically what this information is, you want to find this model and put it up here, you can. I haven't included all the images, so don't worry about that. But here's the stuff, and then it should show some kind of image of a computer or a laptop. You can make it generic, by default. Like, so if you want to say, well, here you're ordering a laptop, just put up a laptop image. Okay, it doesn't have to be. I'm not asking you to go hunt for each of the images for these old computers. Okay, don't do that. That's a waste of time. If you really want to do it for yourself, though, and you want to pick 20 computers that are current, and you want to revamp that list and then go get images for the current computers, that makes more sense. And that'll be a challenge for you. Okay, so you've got this. It's got a list of stuff here, and then some price, sales tax, which is HST, obviously, and your total. And when you click finish, it's done, right? So notice that there's menus on a couple of screens. There's a menu here. There's a menu here, right? There's no menu here, but you have the option to open a saved order here, okay? So again, a bit of more complicated user interface, and that's why it's worth a little bit more, and it's worth a few more points. Instead of our standard 50-something, it's going to be 77 points that I'm looking at, so therefore it's 15% instead of 10%. A little bit more challenging, and you get 3 weeks to do it, right? So you're not killed. So there, I would start, if I was you, if I was going to start with this thing off, I would start with the basics. Create all your user interfaces again, like as much as you can, right? So create all the containers for all this stuff. So that part is all taken care of. That's the easy stuff, the drag and drop stuff, to lay out everything, how your form is going to look. Now, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. Of course, you can make it, like we've done in the other 3 examples, the other 3 assignments, make it your own. If you want to make it a little bit interesting, or the functionality is enhanced in some way, that's up to you, right? But this is the bare minimum that I'm looking for again. Okay, let's get to the details of what I'm looking for. So each of the forms is going to have information, just like I've done before, with what I'm looking for, okay? So your start form, you have a splash screen that basically comes before the start form. a button that allows you to start a new order, right? Or a button that allows you to load an order. And if you notice, it tells you about this thing called open file dialog. So there's open file dialog and save file dialog, open and save. It's pretty simple. And the file dialog itself takes care of all the stuff like finding the directory structure, which folder you're in, all that stuff. And we'll talk about that, like I said, next week, right? We'll be focusing on file handling. A picture box control, the form displays an interesting image relating to dollar computers. What if you don't like dollar computers? I'm calling it dollar computers, but you want to make it your own company, something else instead of dollar computers, like the dollar store of computers, right? Make it your own, whatever. Call it computer or something else. I don't know. Make your own company up. So that's what where the first form is. It's just that little form that allows you to select whether you want to open up an existing order or create a new one. Those are the two options. The selection form is where the data grid view is, and this is where the challenge comes into play, right? Because notice what it says here in B. It says either locally with local DB or on Microsoft Azure, create a database named $computers. Now you could call it whatever your computer company is going to be called, right? Use the SQL database file provided to generate the products table for your database, but if you wanted to fix it up and make your own set of products or whatever, I'd be okay with that too. All right, like I'm giving you some leeway here. That's worth 2 marks. Use the entity framework like we did last week to connect to the database server, either local DB or Microsoft Azure. Now, here's the thing. If you make your own products, then you need to include or export that SQL file so I can look at them, right? Because remember, your local DB is local to your machine, and it has nothing to do with me, right? So it wouldn't work. If I was trying to launch your application, it would turn on, but I would have no access to any data, right? That would be bad. So, of course, the best thing to do is Microsoft Azure. And of course, like before, if you use Microsoft Azure, I'm going to give you a bonus, right? Microsoft Azure is a bit more challenging to set up, which I want to show you how to do, but not everyone has access. So I can't make it required. I can only make it as a bonus. So we'll try and doing that. We'll try kind of set up that stuff today. We'll do another example today with Azure if we can get that done. Okay, so you're going to create a data grid view just like we did last time with its read-only properly set to true. So you can't write to it. You can only read from it. And then you're going to use the products table as a data source for the data grid view. This is we talked about this last week. We'll do it again this week. And then you're going to have a label and a text box at the bottom of the form that displays what you've selected, right? And this event handler, when you click on your data grid view, in a single cell, the whole row will be selected. Okay, that's what that does. Again, your method to display the data, and kind of, you're going to have to figure out a way of when I move to the next file, when I move to the next form, you're going to take the data and move it over somehow. Now, there's different ways of doing that. You don't have to use a container class to contain my data, right? And in fact, you kind of have it, right? When you make your model class, that is the class. You just make an object of that model, and then you're moving forward with that, right? So, so once you move over to the next form, you're into product info form like we talked about before. And some of them, like this selection form or whatever, right? The select form has the data grid view. But from product info form and your order form, it has this little menu strip. So watch for these little menu strips, because it might say something like, use a shared event handler, all right? So watch for that. I mean, it's not, it's kind of intuitive that if it's called exit and you have an exit button, then the exit menu and the exit button should be doing the same thing. But some people, they make separate events for that, and you don't need to. So again, you can load up a previously saved file, which we'll talk about how to do. And that's what the open file dialog box will do. And you can use the save file dialog box to save your hardware configuration, the stuff that you selected. And I said indicate a default file name for the dialog box is product.txt. And we'll talk about how to create that default file name when we do file and IO next week, right? Okay, and then if you select another product, you go back, like I showed you how to do that, and you get rid of the data because you're going to select something else. Cancel button will cancel the order and take you back as well, right? The next button is going to take you to the order form, And the order form, it'll just copy the information that we have here that's inside the product info form, right? Product info form is more like a details form that gives you details about more details about the product, and you know so in longer form as opposed to in some kind of table, right? Which is kind of an ugly way of looking at it. And then when you're in your order form, you're going to finally do your order, your final order, and this is going to show you. Now it says here, add a picture box that displays an image of the computer hardware that is selected from the project's resources library. So I'm not giving you the pictures. You're gonna, like I said, you can pick some stock images of computers. Like if you have a tower, you're gonna make some kind of tower image that you're gonna put in there. If it's a laptop, it'll be a stock laptop image. Unless you want to go crazy and do your own and grab your own images, right? So after that, I mean, the rest is pretty much straightforward. Solution structure is what I'm looking for in terms of how everything is named. Internal documentation in GitHub, of course, that's part of your project. And then I've included a little bit of some screenshots from when I made the template, and as well as a little bit of a rubric in terms of where all the marks lie. Okay, and that's really it in a nutshell. It's not complex. There's just a lot of little parts to it, right? And there's some hiccups that you might encounter, especially when it comes to database. Database, unfortunately, is one of the hardest sections of this course, and I'm hitting it early because in your exam, chances are there's going to be some kind of data component, right? Where you're going to be hitting something in your exam that has to do with database, right? So I need to talk about it now, and file handling and all that kind of stuff, so that you've practiced. Because remember, everything that you practice with your assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4, assignment 5, all these little assignments that I've been giving you is preparing you for your final exam, right? Any questions around this stuff? Yeah, not that crazy, but it's the devil's in the details here. And yes. No stupid questions. How did I get it? Well, you can create a box. There are some additional plugins you can download. I actually used a plugin for that, right? Where you can draw lines and so on, right? There's actually a line drawing, and you can draw circles and lines and stuff like this, and to make your UI whatever you want. If you look for it, it used to exist in the VB version, right? And I think it's called, if I was going to mention this, it's called VB Power Packs. There's a bit of an install to get it going, though. But here's the advantage to it. If you download and install VB Power Packs, it does allow you to do a really interesting print preview, like really quick and dirty, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing, as well as draw circles and lines and squares and all kinds of other stuff. But that's how I did it. Yeah. I was trying to think of other ways to do it. Worst case scenario, if you really want to overkill, get a picture box, make it really small, and drop an image in. But that would be like totally overkill, right? Remember, we're using these forms that are very, very simple. Okay.
So you're saying that the line is not necessary?
No. I mean, you could separate that with and do it in many different ways, right? Like, for example, you could create a text box that doesn't contain anything, and you put a border around it, and you make it flat, like as flat as you want. Like, there's different workarounds for this thing. I don't know. But it's not that important. Any other questions around the assignment? Assignment number 4, due December 2nd, Friday, December 2nd at midnight, right? So lots of time. Okay, let's see if my Windows is back up. Yes, thank you. All right, so let's review what we did last week. I want to talk about how we connected the database last week, and I want to kind of go over it because I know it was like lightning fast for some of you. If you've never done any kind of database connections before, and connecting to local DB is kind of a pain, let's talk about that. So last week, we're looking at lesson 8 from last week, which is also up on GitHub if you wanted to follow along. I just wanted to go over what we had from last week to show you. So here's, if I was going to run this thing. We have this, right? Hey, student details, and it says my name. Okay, and that's all you have, really, at the end of the day. I did create a few forms for examples, though, right? So if you notice what we did, if I was to go and look at Solution Explorer, we have several forms, right? We have a list form, student list form, which looks like this, right? We have a student details form that looks like this, the one you just saw. We also have a list form 2, which includes a few columns, right, that we talked about, and header text. So that's what we kind of did last week. We have app.config. In the app.config, it details how we're connecting to the database. And the database connection is under the connection strings component, which is right down here, right? Notice that I have a college connection, right? And my college connection is local DB, but I also have another one called COMP1004 F2016 Lesson 8 Property Settings College Context Dataset Connection, right? Both are in the connection section. And remember, I talked about there's the 2 ways that you can connect to a database. The old way with ADO.NET and the new way, right, with Entity Framework. So we're going to talk about those in more detail today. But I'm also going to talk about what Entity Framework is and what Link is, because we didn't really have a chance to talk about that too much. Okay? So for now, we'll leave this open. We'll come back to this. But let's talk about some stuff we need to know. So this stuff's up on Blackboard for you, but I want to talk about it in more detail. So what is Link anyway? So I'm going to go to Link. Well, it's interesting enough, but Link is a query language that is specifically created to access any kind of data item you want, right? It doesn't have to be a database. It could be a list, right? So for example, if I make a list, and it's something that I've done programmatically, so there isn't any data store at all, or any kind of storage whatsoever. It's just something that I've created in memory. I can still use Link to sort and search through it, right? Which is amazing, right? Because it's far better than doing comparisons. Imagine if I was searching for an item in a list, I might do something like, if this is the item, then do this, right? If I'm searching for a specific item, I have to do more complicated code, whereas Link makes it a lot easier for us to search for an item. I can also order a list with order by, or the results from what I'm looking at anyway. And I could definitely filter my selections. So those commands that we see here, those, and actually what they are is they're extension methods that are added in when we add Link into our process, right? So extension methods are an advanced topic, which we can't really cover at this point because you need to understand delegates, which we're going to get to in another week or so, right? So, but I want you, when you hear the word delegate in C#, I want you to think of, and this is great if you're taking JavaScript and if you love Node, anonymous function. Think of anonymous function, right? An unnamed function, that's a delegate. It's kind of like what a delegate is, right? So we're going to talk about it. I probably won't use a lot of that because it's more complex. I also want to talk about, in future lectures, I want to talk about lambda expressions, right? Who knows what a lambda expression is? Yay, 1 person, 2 people, right? So yeah, not a lot of people know what lambda expressions are. Basically what they are is, it's like an anonymous inline function that returns something with a single arrow. That's what it's like, right? I don't know if there's a better way to express that, but so imagine if instead of me doing a callback function, like in JavaScript, I'm doing it inline, right? And instead of me doing a whole anonymous function, I just have a single line that does that. Actually, in the latest version of JavaScript, ECMAScript 6, as well as TypeScript, it allows fat arrow functions, which are lambda expressions. So a lot of the more complex languages, like for example C#, Java now, and other languages have lambda expressions. So we're going to be talking about what those are. Okay, so that's future iterations. But really what it is this query language that's built into C# that we just have to use an import statement or a using statement to get to it. And then what it allows us to do is do things like filtering and accessing data a little better. Now we've been using it, last week we used it to access the database, right? The table that we were accessing, but we don't necessarily have to use it, like I said. So 3 steps to do a query operation. Again, 1, get a data source. So whether it's connect to a data source somehow, whether it's a list, a database, a flat file, something. This link can be used for all kinds of things like that, right? And you need to store your data in some sort of structure, whether it's an array or a list or something like that. Again, it's got to be in some kind of indexable kind of structure, right? Second thing is define the query expression. So example would be, select from this database and this table, select this where my ID is equal to so on, like that kind of language, the same kind of query structure that we would expect in a database, right? And the third option is run the query, right, to get the results. So those are the 3 things. And actually, it's the same exact structure when we access data with SQL. Okay, so here's some examples. I'm just going to make this a little larger so you can see. So we have code that defines an array. So here's an integer array of numbers. That's what it's called, right? We're creating an array with 6 components in it, or 6 members, right? We're doing a for loop that's going to iterate through the array, right? So we're going to go from the 0th member all the way to the last one, to the 6th member. And it's going to go from 0 to 5, obviously, because 6 means it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 elements in the array. And then here's the statement. Here's part 2. Make a statement to access the array. So first we define the array. We can iterate through it to fill it with numbers. We just filled it with some numbers, right? Because if you notice, we said, well, number's 0, so the first element of the array is equal to the number. So 0 is equal to 0, 1 is equal to 1, 2 is equal to 2, and so on, right? So the array has something in it, right? From 0 to 5, right? And now we have this number list. We use the var keyword. And remember, we use var. What's var for again? Anyone remember from last week? Yes. Okay. I like that. It's a dynamic type, right? But please don't forget, it's not a dynamic type like JavaScript. It's not like I can change it all the time. It just allows me to, I don't have to be explicit about telling you what data type it is. I'm going to be implicit. So I'm going to read what's on the other side of the equals operator. So anything over here, it's going to try and figure out what this is. And whatever this data is going to become, it creates that kind of variable here. That's what it does. So I don't know what it is, this number list right now. I mean, obviously, it's probably going to be a list because I've named it number list. And this is, chances are, going to return a list, right? But if we don't know what it is, var is going to help us out to find the right data type. Otherwise, they had a lot of debugging issues when it came to link and finding the right data type. And that's one of the reasons why we use var. All right, so notice I put brackets in front of here, and I encourage you to do so. You can put an open parentheses and a closed parentheses at the bottom, and it's not going to hurt you to do that. It kind of says this is all one statement, because if you look at this thing, it looks like it's like multiple lines, and there's no curly braces, right? So just to do that, the reason why I use my parentheses is just to show that this is all one big expression. So this whole thing is actually one big line, because this is where the semicolon is. Starts here and ends there, right? And you're going to see it like that frequently up online. When you look at any kind of link expression, it's going to look like this, right? So it's going to be from number, here's number, in numbers. Okay, so let's analyze this again a little bit more clearly, right? So numbers is the array, numbers. So it's like I'm doing a for each statement. For every number in numbers, right, I'm going to loop through each of the, I'm going to iterate through the data, right? And now I'm going to, when I have a where clause, the where clause is going to filter, right, what I'm looking for. Look for all numbers where I use modulus, where the remainder is 0. So when I divide by 2, the remainder is 0. That's what this says. So that means, what's my output going to be? If I divide by 2, my remainder is 0. So I only want to return a list of those numbers. So I have 6 numbers from 0 to 5. What numbers will it be returning? Yes. Right. 0, 2, and 4. Because that, when you divide those numbers by 2, right, then you get 0 remainder. Okay? That's what modulus does. So it just gives you the remainder. So whatever the number is divided by 2, the remainder is what you get back from this. And if it's 0, that means it's equal to 2, even numbers. Okay. So that's what this is going to do. So it's going to reduce my list. This is the where clause. The where clause is a filter. The filter is what I'm getting back, right? Order by number in descending order. So what am I going to get back? What's the list that I'm going to get back now in your head? If it's 0 to 4, what's going to be if it's descending order? 4 to 0, right? That's wherever I get, whether it's ascending or descending, in alphabetical order or in reverse alphabetical order if I want to. And then the select statement says, select those numbers. Select the numbers in the numbers array that matches these criteria and order them in a specific way. And then store them inside this thing called numbers list, whatever that is. Chances are it's a list, an IEnumerable, most likely. Okay, cool. Everyone understand that? So 2 parts so far. 1 part, define your container, your data container, or get some kind of data source, database, right? And then use an expression to access that data source. That's part 2. 3rd part, right? Do something with your data, right? I mean, obviously, what are you gonna access the data if you're not gonna do anything with it, right? So here we're gonna do something with this. We got number list, and we're gonna build a string, right, of number display. With the number display, we're going to initialize it with a quotation, like an empty string. That's what this is. Now, for each, again, we're going to do a for each loop. For each number in number list, this one now, right? So that's 4 to 0. That's the order now. For each number in number list, I want you to add the number to the number display, to the quotation. So we're converting it to a string. This is a cheap, dirty way to convert it to a string, by the way, because I'm starting with the string, and if I do plus equals, I'm taking that number, even if it's an integer, and converting it to a string right away. This is a cheap and dirty way to do it. I don't recommend, by the way. I'm just putting it out there. And then I'm adding in some tabs and a new line character. That's what's going to happen, all right? This is actually standard stuff. It'll work almost exactly the same in Java, right? And in JavaScript. For each might be a little bit different. And then I'm going to pop up a message box to show whatever the number I'm displaying is, the string, with my number display, which is 4 to 0, and then, like it says, sorted even numbers. Make sense? So sorted even numbers is the title, and then 4 to 0 is what I'm going to be showing. And each of the numbers, notice it says plus equals to, plus a tab and a new line. Each number will be on a different line, right? Because of the new line character, because this is iterating for each one, right? If this new line character was at the bottom after the for each loop, then it would kind of put it horizontally, 4 to 0, from left to right. But this is doing 4 to 0 from top to bottom because of the new line character. Whew, right? I'm doing this because when you guys come to reading data, you have to understand how to do this kind of stuff. So if I'm getting, let's do this other real example now. I'm reading data from my computer parts that you're going to do for assignment 4, sorry. So you're reading the data in. I'm looking at the data is going to actually be an object. The object is going to have a bunch of different things inside of it, right? Can't sort like this anymore, where my number is you know, when I divide it by 2, it's got a remainder of 0. I can't do it that way because my object has multiple properties, not just one, right? But I can have an array of objects, a list of objects, and each object, a much more complex structure that we're talking about here with your product list. Each product in your product list has different properties, and what we can do is, if I wanted to search for something where I want to return only one of them, right? I want to return where my product.id is equals to product ID, whatever the product ID I'm searching for is, right? That's what I'm going to do, and that'll return one object. Some other things to do here, which I recommend. Sometimes what we need to do is we have to cast this whole thing to a list. So I did that last week, where I kind of took this whole thing and casted it to a list. I actually said .toList, and what it did was and that's part of link as well, where I take that the result of my expression and I cast it to a list so that I don't have an issue, right? And then this will be a true numbers list as opposed to something else, right? I can do the same thing if I want to get one result. And we'll talk about how to do that again. I kind of showed you last week, but that's the way we do it. Okay, questions so far? So 1, 2, 3 steps, again, get the source, expression, do an expression, and get some results, right? Very simple. All right, so again, here's the way we can setting up the syntax for the clause. Again, we use the from keyword, right? Usually this is the data type, right? So from whatever we're looking at, here's the element name. And sometimes we don't have to, see how the square brackets are here? This means that it's optional. Sometimes we don't have to define what my element name is because of implicit casting. So what it'll do is it'll sit there and go, what am I polling? What's the data that I'm looking at? Oh, I'm looking at integer data. This must be an integer, so I don't have to put this in. But you could if you wanted to. If I wanted to put it in from, like back up here, if I wanted to say from int number in numbers, I could do that, and that would be perfectly valid, right? Yes? No. Sometimes it doesn't make it faster at all, actually. Sometimes what it does is it's just for clarity, right? So you're looking at it and going, okay, it's a complex type, especially when it comes to something like some kind of object or whatever. And if I want it to be more human readable for some reason, I may want to do that. Most often, we don't, because we can see what it is. If we put the right variable name in there, it's fine, right? But that's a good question. Yeah, so that's optional. And then we're looking in whatever the collection name is, whether it's a list or an array or some other kind of collection, a dictionary. We can only look in a collection of data for us to compare. Okay. Again, this is just for data sources, okay? So here's a data source, a decimal, again, another data source. And then here's sales totals, all right? And we're making a new decimal array. Here it is. So the decimal array, sales totals, and here's our decimal array, 1286.45, and we need the M to specify that it's a decimal and not a double. That's what we use this this character for, right? And then we do a statement that defines the expression again. So we use the var keyword, the sales list, and then we say from, again, the from keyword, sales. So sales has got to be a decimal, because that's what we're looking at, in sales totals, because we're looking at sales totals, and sales totals is an array of decimals. Therefore, sales has to be a decimal type because of type inference. We're kind of figuring out, Visual Studio and IntelliSense will figure out that that's what it is, right? Which is kind of cool. And then, now what's it returning here, right? Select sales. What's it returning? Well, yeah, but I'm not filtering. If I'm not filtering and I'm not ordering, what am I getting back? Everything, right? So this is a way of getting, get everything. So if I want the entire list, I'm going to do it this way. But again, I caution you that probably the right way to do this is to type this or cast this to a list. Like put it in brackets and go to list, and now this is a list. Yes. No. Star is not a SQL statement. This is a link. It's very SQL-like, but it's not. So this is what you do. So you select the number. You're selecting the object that's being returned. So here's you're searching for something. Here you're returning whatever you found. And here, because we're not filtering, we're getting everything. Okay? And here's the code that executes the query as another example. So we have a decimal with a sum of 0. And then for each loop, sales in sales lists, this has to be an integer again. Same idea, but we made it a var in this particular case. And then we say the sum is, we're going to add in the sales for each of the objects that we're getting back. So we're just going to sum all these up. That's what's happening. Okay, so very simple query statement. So you can see that when we use link, it's very powerful, right? We don't have to use if, else, or any other kind of structure to kind of search for and find and return data. It's a very efficient way of doing that kind of stuff. And that's why link is much better than using ADO.NET when I kind of connect to a database. Typically what we do is when you connect to a database, and we're going to go over that in another week or so, another way of connecting to the database, you're going to see ADO.NET is really wordy, and it's really old, an old way of doing it, right? And it takes a lot of effort for us to connect. Now, I'm teaching you this also because Entity Framework with link, that combination, right? When we take it and put it on the web, It's the most modern way of connecting to a database on the web. We don't use ADO.NET to connect to a database on the web anymore, right? And it doesn't matter. Link doesn't care what data source you have. So if you connect to MySQL, sure. If you connect to SQL, great. Postgres, okay. It doesn't care. As long as you get the data from the data source and you put it into a list or other kind of collection, it doesn't care how you get the data, right? So that's the good thing about Link. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, here's another example that uses a generic list of invoices as the data source. Okay, so here's my invoice, my class invoice. So this is a more complex example, so we can talk about this, right? So it has a bunch of public properties, right? The first one is an invoice ID. Then I have a customer ID, right? And then I have a date time object for my invoice date, whatever the invoice date was, right? A product total, a sales tax, a shipping, and invoice total. So a much more complex object to work with. It's not a string or a decimal anymore. Now, how do I work with something like this? And we've kind of saw that last week. Well, first, we create our data source. So here it is. We're going to make a list of type invoice. This is a customized object. Whenever you see these angle brackets in C#, right, and in Java, as well as in the latest version of JavaScript, if you use ECMAScript 6, you can also do this too, right? Not in old JavaScript 1.8, right? But ECMAScript 6, if you're going to go with that, right? What I mean by that is ECMAScript 5. If you do ECMAScript 5, this won't, the angle brackets won't work. But ECMAScript 6, JavaScript, I'm talking about, the latest version, ECMAScript Harmony, call it whatever you like, ECMAScript 2015, right? It allows these angle brackets, and it says, hey, this list is of type whatever it is, and this is the type. Type is invoice. That means I've created a custom type, which is my class, this object, and I'm saying this invoice list is an invoice list. Invoice, which is the type, and list is the collection, right? Now, when I just do this part, that's creating a shape of my object. Until I assign the object here, until I use my equals, right? Or I use the new keyword, this means nothing. It's just a reference. It's almost like I've reserved space. That's what I've done in memory, right? So I've taken a little bit of memory and I said, okay, I need the shape. I need a compartment that's going to eventually fit a list of type invoice. That's what I need. I don't know how big it's going to be yet, but I want you to reserve a little bit of memory. Okay, hasn't done it yet. Hasn't really done it, but it's kind of creating a reference, if you will. Or it's kind of casting a list, or creating it's creating a variable that's empty, an empty list, basically. Now, once we use the equals operator and we connect it to something, for example, invoice DB, if we're going to connect with Entity Framework to invoice to it, something called invoice database, and we're looking at this method, right? This method that we built into the database called get invoices. So some kind of function that we built into the database, right? This could return a list of invoices and store it inside this invoice list. That's what this is doing. Okay, now we don't have an example like that right now, but that's what this line is saying to us. And then let's talk about part 2 and part 3, and we'll give you actually an actual example to try in a second, so I don't bore the crap out of you guys by showing you PowerPoints, right? So now the invoices is where I'm going to start looking at the invoice list. So I'm going to say, okay, create a variable that's called invoices, and I want to look inside the invoice list, which we took from the database, and for every invoice in the invoice list, just return everything, and store it inside this other variable called invoices, lowercase I. And then, of course, do something with it. Iterate with the for each loop and show the invoice total, because invoice total is a property, which is right here, a decimal property of the invoice class. Now this could confuse people because it's a complex object. Okay, here's another one that I can shoot off at the top of my head. All right, if we did the character class. Character class has strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, intelligence, and charisma. Right, back to D&D again. If I make a list of characters, right, whether it's in a game or something else, right, instead of an invoice list, and if I want to say, well, return all of them. So if I say, if this was instead of invoices, if it was characters, I'm getting all of the entire list of characters and I'm returning them. That means everything, all their details, everything about the characters. This is very similar to what we need to do for our assignment 4, right? Okay. Any questions around this stuff? Let's show you that, what I'm talking about here. So if I go back to last week, I have something, and if I look at list form 2 from last week, this is COMP1004, F2016, lesson 8, okay? And if I look at list form 2, I see that there's a data grid view, right? But if I look at the code behind file, so if I view the code in the code behind file, you can see that I got a couple pieces of code. So in my load event handler, right, for the form, what I'm going to do is a couple things. One, I want to connect to the database. So I'm connecting to my database. I'm connecting to the data store here, right? I'm going to ignore line 26 for a second, okay? We'll talk about that again. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say for get a student list, create a student list container, right? And now get everything from the students list, the students table, convert it to a list, and store it here. And if I hover over it, you can see that it's a list of type student. That's what it's returning, right? Now that I have a list of type student, I can indicate that the data grid view, the student list data grid view, is using this student list as its data source. That's what I'm doing. And that's what you'll be doing for your assignment number 4. But instead of a student list, you're going to have a computer parts or computers that you're going to access. It's going to be very similar, right? Okay. Questions up to this point? Gabe, anything? You're golden? Wonderful. I love it. That means you're perfect at this. No, I'm saying just because I'm covering some stuff that we covered last week, but I'm covering it again, and it's a little bit more complex, this topic. So I want to make sure that you're okay. That's all. Tell me your questions now. This is the question time, specifically for this. Oh, okay. You don't have any now. Okay. Anyone else have any questions so far? I know I'm going slow, but I need to talk about LINQ because we're going to use LINQ extensively, especially when it comes to things like we can do full CRUD with LINQ, right? And with the entity framework, right? So when I want to write to a database, it's a little different than when I'm doing reading from a database, right? Here's the question. Am I using LINQ to write to the database, or am I using the entity framework to write to the database? And the answer is it's the entity framework. So entity framework works nicely with LINQ. LINQ, it queries. It does a lot of, I can get objects from the database, right? I can create objects like I've done here. I've created a student list, right? That's an object of type student, a list of type student. That's what this is. And again, I can be explicit, and instead of using the var keyword here, I could use student list. So list of type, remember the angle brackets means type student. I could do that. And I've defined student inside my model. So if I go to my models folder, you can see that student is a model object, right? So a model class. This is where it is. And I got this right from the entity framework, right? So I got first name, last name, the program that they're in. We did all that last week. So how would I convert this if I was going to do things for assignment number 4, right? Well, I'd make a product table on the database, which I would have, right? And in that product table, when I'm looking at it, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to connect to the entity framework. It's going to cast my class for me. So all my class is going to be done. There's nothing for me to do there. And now that I have my class, right? When I select my object, I can create other objects of that class. I don't have to just use it for querying the database or showing data. I can also create objects of that class and save those objects in a very ordered fashion, whether I want to save it as a binary file, a text file, or some other kind of structure, right? Or pass it back to the database as an object. Okay? So, it's not that complex. And we're going to do full CRUD, again, over the course of this class and next class, if I can do it with you guys. Okay. So that's kind of the first piece. And I'm going slow because some of this it can be rather confusing when you look at this stuff, right? Because you're looking at it and there's a lot of different piece parts. There's the model part. It almost goes back to Node.js again, right? But by no means as complex as Node.js for people who don't like it. But you've got your model, which is like your schema. If you're looking at Node.js, a Mongo schema, that's what your model's like, right? That's what this students thing is, right? If I look at students, if you just look at this part, it looks very much like a schema, right, of some sort. That's what it is. A model class, right? And just like in Node.js, we're going to use an object of this to save to the database. That's what we're going to do. So if I was going to save an object of type student to the database, then I would create one. Okay, we can do that in the student details. Because right now, all of my, everything that happens with my file, and all it does is it lists students, right? But I want to be able to do a couple things with the student list that I've kind of created. And I want your help to help me out here, right? One of the things that I want to do is I want to position, some buttons on the form. So when I click on that particular row, I have additional buttons that I'm going to create that I can get to. And when I click on that button, it's going to do something. So I want to be able to do that. Okay? So let's take a look and see what I'm talking about here. So if I run this thing right now, we have this data grid view, right? Actually, we just have this. Let's go back to the data grid view. I'm going to go into the program to reset who it starts first. And notice it just says student details, but that doesn't make any sense. I want to start with a list form 2, which is what I want to look at from last week, right? So list form 2. Oh. List form 2. There we go. That's what's going to start first. And if you look at this list form, it's going to show all the objects. And we have a program description over here. So my student, my program, and a program description. And you know what? I can probably expand this later on. And I want to have some additional buttons over here. And the button is going to say, I want to edit. I want to be able to do an edit. I want to be able to do a delete, right, with a delete button. And I want to be able to do an add. I want to add a new student too. How do I do that? Okay, so that's what I want to do. And we're going to start that after the break. So let's take a short break, 10 minutes. Let's get yourself a coffee or whatever. Do a little bio break, get a smoke, and then come back, and then we'll continue, right? I know it's bad, but it's what we do, right? We're bad people, but we're not as bad as Trump. Hold on.